Drawing poses is hard, and I used to completely avoid them. Despite the common advice to use gesture and basic shapes, I struggled to translate it to my own illustrations. I was searching for that missing link. Through reading various books, I uncovered a method from the old masters that arguably saved me months, maybe even years, in my journey. A timeless technique to help you draw any pose reliably and consistently. I'll take you through what I did to learn it, but first, let's change the way we think. If you're anything like me, sketching full poses would have been an impossible task. And no matter what you tried, something about it would just look flat. And trying to add color on top of it would just make it worse. It's like the line art wasn't doing its job. But what if the way we were thinking about lines was wrong all along, and that's what was holding us back? Lines don't actually exist in nature, but from childhood, we're introduced to art through drawing stick figures, coloring in between lines, and shading just becomes an attempt to get rid of those unwanted lines that weren't even supposed to be there. A better way is to divert your attention from thinking about things linearly and rather see the two contrasting values of shadow and light, the contours that separate form. Now, yes, we still need to capture the basic gesture of the pose with lines, and I do that by using S-curves and C-curves and seeing the imbalances in the pose as guidance, more on that here. But when I start building up those basic shapes, values and form is something I immediately take into consideration. But how do I do that? And what does all that even mean? In order for me to build the shapes that make up the form, I need to understand the muscles of the body and planes. Ultimately, if you can see those shadow shapes and place them in correct size and placement, the anatomy will be properly displayed either way. And this leads directly into understanding chiaroscuro, which is an Italian term for the interplay of light and shadow in art, creating a 3D effect on a 2D surface. Leonardo da Vinci uses technique in the Mona Lisa, using shadow shapes to depict features without outlines. He distinguished between form shadows caused by the form turning away from light and cast shadows caused by a form intercepting light and casting a shadow. Artists emphasize these differences to create a more convincing illusion of depth and form. So I use those shadow shapes to help me as I begin to find the forms that make up the pose. It's understanding the relationship of shadow and light and how they sit on the form that helps. And from there, I can sketch out the rest of the pose and begin to really make my character look unique. And adding and experimenting with different stuff for my reference, understanding the basic separation of light and shadow and using those contours as guidance. Now, do we need to necessarily do the sketch from what we've discussed? I don't think so, but the sketch is something I'm using just so I can understand what I'm going to paint. It's not going to become as integral to the process moving forward. And look at that, now I've gone from a mannequin to a sketch that's ready for painting. This whole time I've been talking about shadow and light and how we use that to inform our sketch, but what about finishing the painting off? I may have fixed my sketching problem, but what if I can't translate that sketch to color? The truth is, when I was learning this, I exclusively painted poses in black and white and ditched the sketching process entirely for some attempts to hammer in that form and cast shadow concept of chiaroscuro. I worked only in black and white. To understand value, thinking about hue and saturation was just way too much. Just playing around with edges and contours was enough trouble, but after failing a bit, color clicked too. By using the Ctrl Y shortcut to switch my canvas to black and white, I would color shift and find those shadow values, painting in the forms of the face and working my way down. Painting, keeping in mind a more diffused lighting coming from the top left. My understanding of the muscles and forms helped me guess how the clothing would wrap around it and where those shadows needed to fall. I mostly had one shadow layer present, duplicating layers for safety every time. I kept progressing and building up contrast with multiply and color dodge, and was able to call the painting done. But wait, surely it's not that easy, right? Is this all you need to do to draw any pose? Maybe I'm skipping steps. But nah, I think there's a logical progression here. But what does that mean for you? How can you start to apply the principles of gesture, form, and of course value? If I were you, I would suggest taking it one step at a time, starting with reading some extra information on the topic. And if gesture seems confusing, practice that first and build out those basic forms, paying attention to the relationships the shadows have on those basic shapes. After that, you can work on sketching full poses. And once you feel confident on your understanding, focus on value before moving to color. Each one of these steps builds upon the previous one, so make sure you're comfortable with each step before moving to the next. You might find it helpful to check out this video on anatomy, or maybe color is something you're struggling with.